There is a habit so quiet, so ordinary, that most people ignore it the moment they encounter it. Yet those who practice it consistently begin to transform in ways that seem impossible to explain. Not instantly, not with dramatic flashes of change, but gradually, steadily, until the course of their entire life begins to shift. It requires no wealth, no rare ability, no endless hours of effort. And perhaps that is exactly why it is overlooked. The human mind is conditioned to chase complexity while dismissing the simple things that hold real influence. Twice a day, every single day. That is all this practice asks. And that is precisely where most people fail, not because it is difficult, but because it appears too easy to delay, too easy to skip, too easy to promise themselves they will begin later. And in that postponement, the advantage quietly slips away. Most people wait for motivation. They wait for perfect timing. They wait for pressure to force them into action. Most people wait for motivation. They wait for perfect timing. They wait for pressure to force them into action. But this practice operates in reverse. It creates the condition people are waiting for. It builds clarity before confusion appears. Imagine beginning your morning with intention instead of reaction, ending your evening with awareness instead of drifting aimlessly, refusing to allow your thoughts to scatter without purpose, but instead directing them deliberately, as though shaping an invisible force with enormous influence, because that is exactly what is happening. Thoughts are never random for long. They become patterns. Patterns become habits. Habits become outcomes. Whether you notice it or not, you are outcomes. Whether you notice it or not, you are already rehearsing something every day. The only question is whether what you repeat is strengthening your future or weakening it. This quiet daily act interrupts unconscious repetition. It forces you to pause, to focus, to choose your thinking rather than passively accept whatever enters your mind. At first, it feels insignificant, almost too small to matter. Yet repetition transforms it into something far greater than it appears. There have always been individuals who followed this simple discipline faithfully, not because it was exciting, but because they understood what it was shaping beneath the surface. They were not merely repeating thoughts or phrases. They were establishing direction, and slowly, almost without noticing it, their confidence shifted, their judgment sharpened, their awareness expanded. Opportunities once invisible began to reveal themselves, not because the world had changed, but because they had. Most people search endlessly for dramatic breakthroughs, one idea, one opportunity, one event that changes everything. But what if the deepest transformation is built quietly, through consistency, through something so simple it almost seems changes everything? But what if the deepest transformation is built quietly, through consistency, through something so simple it almost seems unimportant? That is where the separation begins. Those who dismiss it continue reacting, repeating the same cycles, drifting through the same patterns. Those who commit to it, even when it seems small, even when it appears unnecessary, begin moving in an entirely different direction. Because twice each day, every day, you are sending instructions to your mind, to your decisions, to your future. And with each repetition, that instruction grows stronger until it begins shaping outcomes you once believed were impossible to reach. You will not notice the change immediately. That is what makes ignoring it so dangerous. The effects begin quietly, subtly, almost invisibly, but over time they accumulate until the difference becomes undeniable. The truth is, most people will never follow through with it, not because they are incapable, but over time they accumulate until the difference becomes undeniable. The truth is, most people will never follow through with it, not because they are incapable, but because they underestimate it. They search for something larger, faster, more impressive, and in doing so, they miss the very thing that could have changed their entire direction. But for those who truly understand, for those who practice it without exception, this small daily act becomes far more powerful than it first appears. It becomes the foundation. And once the foundation is secure, everything built upon it begins to rise. I must first tell you this. A day does not truly begin when a man opens his eyes. It begins when his mind accepts direction. And for most people, that direction is never consciously chosen. It is inherited from circumstance. They wake into noise, pressure, distraction, and demands already waiting for them. Before they have formed a single deliberate thought, the day has already taken control. This is the first form of weakness, not lack of effort, but lack of this. Not lack of effort, but lack of command. A man who does not direct his thinking at the beginning of the day will spend the rest of it responding to forces he never chose. His actions may appear intentional, yet they are shaped by pressure, distraction, and whatever influence reaches him first. He may call this living, but in reality, it is reaction. You must understand that the mind, immediately upon waking, exists in a uniquely receptive condition. It has not yet been scattered by the world. It has not yet absorbed the noise of obligation and distraction. For a brief period, it remains open, ready to receive instruction. And what enters the mind in that moment strongly influences everything that follows. The drifting individual wastes this completely. He rises without intention. He immediately turns toward distraction. He allows the first random thoughts that appear to dominate him. And because those thoughts are unchosen, they are rarely useful. They consist of worry, unfinished concerns, uncertainty, memory, obligation. From that beginning, the entire day unfolds accordingly. His attention becomes scattered, his decisions become delayed, his actions lose force. Even when he works hard, his effort produces little advancement, not because he lacks intelligence or ability, but because he surrendered the most important moment of the day. The man who rises differently understands something essential. He does not permit the day to begin before he has directed it himself. Before he accepts outside influence, he turns inward. He pauses. He chooses his thoughts. He turns inward. He pauses. He chooses his thoughts deliberately. He fixes his mind upon the direction he has already decided to pursue, and in doing so, he establishes command. The act itself is simple, so simple that many dismiss it entirely. Yet within that simplicity exists a force capable of shaping the entire day. When a man declares his direction before the world interrupts him, he creates a standard against which all his actions are measured. Without that standard, there is only movement without purpose. I have watched ordinary men rise steadily, while others remain trapped in the same condition year after year. They possessed no unusual talent, no extraordinary advantage. The difference was not found in their effort, but in their beginning. They refused to start their mornings in confusion. They began them in command. Every morning without fail, they returned to their purpose. They repeated it. They reflected upon it. They impressed it upon their minds until it became unmistakably clear. And then they carried that clarity into action. At first, nothing appeared different. But gradually, their decisions became faster. Their actions became more direct. Their attention no longer wandered aimlessly. They began noticing opportunities others overlooked. And eventually their results reflected this inner shift. People observed the difference without fully understanding it. They would say, "He seems certain, he moves with confidence, he always knows what he's doing." But what they were witnessing was not talent, it was preparation. Quiet preparation completed before the rest of the world had even begun the day. You must realize that the mind cannot fully obey two opposing directions at once. It cannot follow your chosen purpose while also surrendering to the confusion of the world. It will move toward whichever influence is strongest, earliest, and repeated most consistently. If you fail to guide it intentionally, something else will guide it for you. This is why the early hours possess such importance. Not because the time itself contains magic, but because the mind is still untouched by distraction. In those quiet moments before demands and interruptions arrive, you possess a rare advantage, the ability to shape your thinking without resistance. A single focused thought, repeated with conviction during that period, carries more influence than countless scattered thoughts later in the day. This is the principle you must adopt immediately. Never allow your day to begin before your thinking has been directed. Do not accept the first random thoughts that enter your mind. Choose how your day to begin before your thinking has been directed. Do not accept the first random thoughts that enter your mind. Choose them consciously. Lead them. Command them. Fix your attention on what you intend to build, become, or accomplish, not vaguely, not as a wish, but as a clear and definite statement. You must see it vividly in your mind. Repeat it with certainty. Hold your attention on it until it becomes familiar. This repetition is not empty ritual. It is deliberate conditioning. Every return strengthens the impression. Every repetition increases its influence. Over time, the thought moves beyond surface awareness and settles deeper within the mind, where it begins guiding action automatically. You will begin to notice subtle but powerful changes. Your focus will stop wandering so easily. You will return naturally to your purpose throughout the day. Decisions that once confused you will become simpler. Opportunities that previously passed unnoticed will suddenly stand out with clarity. This is not coincidence. It is the natural result of directed thought repeated consistently. Others will begin recognizing something different about you as well. They will notice that you are harder to distract, that you do not change direction impulsively, that your actions carry order instead of chaos. And because of this, people respond differently to you. They begin trusting your judgment. They begin valuing your direction. They begin offering opportunities that rarely appear for those who drift without control. You must also understand that consistency is what gives this practice its power. It cannot be performed occasionally. It cannot depend on convenience or mood. It must become daily and unquestioned. Every morning you begin without direction strengthens confusion. Every morning you begin with direction strengthens command. And eventually, these repeated beginnings become your confusion. Every morning you begin with direction strengthens command. And eventually, these repeated beginnings become your condition. The drifting man will always dismiss this because it appears too simple. He searches for complex strategies, dramatic breakthroughs, and complicated systems because they feel more impressive. Yet power rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it appears quiet, repetitive, and almost invisible until enough time has passed for its effects to become undeniable. Do not make the mistake of judging an action by how dramatic it appears in the moment. Judge it by what it produces over time. This quiet beginning, practiced daily, will shape your future more deeply. This quiet beginning, practiced daily, will shape your future more deeply than occasional bursts of intense effort, because it determines the condition under which every other action is performed. It decides whether you move through life with clarity or confusion, purpose or reaction, direction or drift. So you must make a decision. From this point forward, you will not allow the day to claim your mind or you claim it yourself. You will rise not to react, but to direct. You will take possession of your thinking before distraction attempts to take possession of it for you. This may seem like a small act, but it is a decisive one. Practiced long enough, it separates those who merely exist from those who intentionally shape their lives. While others are carried by circumstance, you will be steering your direction deliberately. And in that steady difference, maintained day after day, your results will begin to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that becomes impossible to stop. You must now turn your attention to the other half of this discipline, the closing of the day. For a man may lose control not only in the morning, but also in the evening, often without realizing it. The end of the day is not merely a time for rest. It is a moment for examination. And the man who neglects this moment slowly condemns himself to repeat the same mistakes again and again. Most people do not truly conclude their day. They drift out of it unconsciously. They move from activity into distraction, from distraction into exhaustion, and finally into sleep without reflection. The experiences of the day pass through their minds without being examined, and because they remain unexamined, they become repeated. This is the second form of weakness. Not failure itself, but unconscious repetition. What a man refuses to review, he eventually repeats. And what he repeats long enough becomes habit. You must understand that the mind naturally follows established patterns. Deliberately, they strengthen over time. A hesitation ignored today becomes instinct tomorrow. A weakness excused repeatedly eventually feels permanent. This is how drifting takes hold of a person's life, not through one dramatic collapse, but patterns left uncorrected for too long. The man who governs himself refuses to allow this. At the end of each day, he returns inward once again. He does not rush immediately toward distraction or escape. He pauses, he reflects, he examines himself honestly, not to punish himself, but to improve himself. This practice appears simple, yet it possesses extraordinary power. Because in that quiet moment of reflection, he enters unconscious repetition. He brings hidden patterns into awareness. He sees clearly where he acted with strength, where he lost focus, where he moved with purpose, and where he drifted away from it. That awareness becomes the beginning of correction. I have known men who achieved more growth within a single year through this practice than others achieved in an entire decade without it. Not because they worked harder, but because they corrected themselves consistently. They refuse to allow mistakes to accumulate. They refuse to allow weakness to harden into identity. Each evening, they ask themselves difficult but necessary questions. Where did I hesitate today? Where did I act with certainty? Where did I abandon my purpose? Where did I move closer toward it? These questions are uncomfortable because they demand honesty. Most people avoid them for exactly that reason. They prefer distraction over reflection. They tell themselves tomorrow will somehow be different without ever examining why today remained the same. Today is never understood. You must therefore end each day intentionally. Return to your purpose before you sleep. Measure your acts against it honestly. Do not judge yourself harshly, but do not excuse yourself carelessly either. See yourself clearly, because what you can clearly see, you can change. What you refuse to examine will continue controlling you silently. This evening practice does more than reveal mistakes. It develops awareness. Over time, you begin recognizing your recurring patterns. You notice where you consistently weaken. You identify the situations that pull you away from your direction. And once those patterns become visible, they begin losing their control over you. You prepare for them. You anticipate them. When they appear again, you meet them consciously instead of This is how discipline is truly built, not through force alone, but through repeated correction. Others will begin seeing the effects of this process in you. They will notice that you improve steadily instead of endlessly repeating the same errors. They will observe that your behavior sharpens over time, that your decisions become cleaner, your actions more intentional. And whether they understand it or not, they will recognize something increasingly rare, a person who governs himself deliberately instead of being governed by habit. Most people remain statically. They repeat yesterday unconsciously and wonder nothing changes. But the man who examines himself daily breaks that cycle. He refuses to drift. He refuses to treat weakness as permanent. He accepts responsibility for his conduct, and through that responsibility, he gains control. You must also understand that the evening is not only for correction. It is also for reinforcement. When you act with strength, acknowledge it. When you remain aligned with your purpose, recognize it. This is not arrogance. It is reinforcement. What the mind recognizes repeatedly becomes stronger. What becomes stronger becomes easier to repeat. So the evening serves two essential purposes: removing what weakens you and strengthening what advances you. Without correction, you continue drifting. Without reinforcement, you lose confidence. Combined, you grow steadily. And before the day ends completely, you must once again return to central direction. Repeat it clearly. Impress it upon your mind one final time before rest. Not mechanically, but intentionally. Because the mind continues working even while the body sleeps. It organizes, it processes, it continues moving in the direction you last impressed upon it. This is why your final thoughts matter. If they are scattered, confusion continues through the night. If they are directed, the mind continues moving toward that direction even unconsciously. So the day does not truly end with sleep, it ends with instruction. The drifting individual never realizes this. He falls asleep in distraction, worry, noise, or mental chaos, and therefore wakes unchanged. But the man who governs himself closes the day differently. He reviews his actions, he corrects his errors, he strengthens his purpose, and then he rests, not in confusion, but in control. You must now understand the force that gives this entire practice its deepest influence. The words a man repeatedly speaks to himself. Thought alone carries power, but thought expressed through deliberate language enters the mind more forcefully and remains there longer. Words repeated with emotion and conviction gradually become accepted as truth, and once accepted, they begin directing behavior automatically. Most people use this force against themselves without realizing it. They speak carelessly about their limitations, their fears, their failures, and their doubts. They repeat their problems so often that those problems become familiar, and whatever becomes familiar eventually feels permanent. In this way, many people shape their own condition through repeated negative suggestion without ever recognizing what they are doing. You must reverse this process completely. You must learn to speak to yourself intentionally. Your words must strengthen instead of weaken, direct instead of confuse, command instead of question. This is the principle of self-suggestion, impressing chosen ideas upon the mind through repeated language until those ideas become belief. And belief, once accepted deeply enough, begins governing action. The drifting individual speaks according to emotion. If he feels uncertain, he says, "I can't." If he feels discouraged, he says, "Nothing ever changes." If he feels challenged, he says, "This is impossible for me." Every repetition deepens the impression. Every careless statement strengthens the condition he wishes to escape. Eventually, his actions begin aligning with those repeated declarations, and he mistakes this conditioning for reality. You must take control of this process deliberately. Twice each day, at the beginning and the close of the day, you must speak to yourself with purpose. Declare clearly what you intend to become. State the direction you have chosen. Repeat it with conviction. Because words spoken without feeling carry little force, but words spoken with emotion and certainty penetrate far deeper into the mind. At first, what you say may feel unnatural. You may repeat words your current condition does not fully support. This is normal. Belief is not the starting point. Belief is built through repetition. You must continue speaking the direction you have chosen long before evidence appears. Gradually, the words stop feeling foreign. Doubt weakens, familiarity grows, and eventually belief begins replacing resistance. This is not blind imagination. It is deliberate conditioning. You are training your mind to accept a different identity, a different standard, a different future. And once the mind accepts that new condition deeply enough, your actions begin aligning with it naturally. Others will eventually notice this change in your speech as well. You will stop speaking endlessly about limitations. You will stop describing yourself as trapped or powerless. Your words will begin carrying certainty, calmness, and direction. People will hear intention in the way you speak, and because words reflect thought, they will sense strength before you ever announce it openly. Most individuals reveal their weakness through careless speech. The person who governs his words gradually learns to govern his thinking, and the person who governs his thinking ultimately governs his results. You must also understand that precision matters. Your words must be definite. Vague declarations produce vague direction. Uncertain language creates uncertain action. Speak clearly about what you are building. Speak clearly about who you are becoming. Your words must describe the direction you have chosen, not merely the condition you are trying to escape. Do not speak as someone wishing weakly for change. Speak as someone who has already decided. That decision, repeated daily through language, begins shaping belief, and belief shapes action more powerfully than temporary motivation ever could. You must also guard yourself against contradiction. If you strengthen your mind in the morning but weaken yourself throughout the day through careless speech, you divide your influence. The mind receives conflicting instructions. One moment you direct it toward confidence, the next you reinforce fear or limitation. This inconsistency weakens progress. Your words throughout the day must support the direction you establish during your practice. The more consistent your language becomes, the stronger your internal alignment becomes. Repetition gives force. Consistency gives permanence. Over time, something remarkable begins happening. You become conscious of your own speech. You notice immediately when your words fall below your chosen standard. You catch yourself before reinforcing weakness. And through this awareness, your language slowly transforms from unconscious reaction into deliberate direction. Most people never reach this level of awareness. They speak automatically according to habit, and their habits reflect years of limitation. But you must build a different habit entirely: intentional speech, controlled suggestion, repeated reinforcement of the direction you have chosen. Eventually, this practice becomes natural. You no longer force yourself to speak with confidence. It becomes part of your thinking automatically. Your words carry weight because they are supported by repetition, consistency, and internal belief. Others begin trusting your direction because your speech no longer feels uncertain or divided. This influence is not created overnight. It is built gradually through daily reinforcement, through refusing to speak against yourself, through choosing words that align with the person you intend to become. You must therefore make a firm decision from this point forward. Stop reinforcing limitation through careless language. Stop repeating doubt as though it were fact. Stop strengthening the very conditions you wish to escape. Instead, direct your speech intentionally. Choose your words carefully. Repeat them daily with conviction, morning and evening, without exception. Because over time, the words you repeat become the thoughts you believe. The thoughts you believe become the actions you perform. The actions you perform become the life you eventually live. And once that process has repeated long enough, your results can no longer be the same.